This is Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue, media specialist for the LFA. In Minding the Forest, we talk about all things forestry. Forest landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers such as lumber, paper, and pellet mills all play an important role in the conservation and management of forests in Louisiana for the important renewable natural resource it is. Managed forests offer more for wildlife and water protection, so the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Minding the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. Tim Temple, the Insurance Commissioner-elect for Louisiana, welcome and glad to have you here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Let's start out. Let's tell us a little bit about yourself. Let folks know where you're from and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, well, look, I like to say I grew up in the piney woods of DeRidder, Louisiana, deep in the heart of the forestry business. But we've also got a lot of ag that takes place in Beauregard Parish.
Yep.
But grew up in DeRidder. I'm a DeRidder Dragon graduate, class of 1988, and I grew up in an insurance family, second generation insurance professional, if you will. Mm-hmm. My father was in this business for decades, and when I got out of high school, I really didn't know didn't know what I wanted to do, but certainly didn't think that insurance was going to be my path. But shortly after graduating college, that's what I did, and I was in it for over 20 years before exiting the industry. But I'll tell you, over those 20 years, I wore a lot of different hats. I was very fortunate that I didn't just have I wasn't just an agent, or I wasn't just a claims person, or I wasn't just one particular line of business. And not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but I was just very fortunate that I got to experience a lot of different. I got to take a lot of bites on different sides of the apple, if you will. And so started off as an insurance agent. Actually, let me go back. Before that, my first day after graduating high school, I left and went to Europe and worked at Lloyd's of London for the entirety of the summer. So as an 18-year-old working at Lloyd's, the world's largest market for insurance and reinsurance in the world, and I enjoyed it. But like I said, I didn't really know that that's what I wanted to do. I didn't have that vision that that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life as a career. But anyway, so fast forward, graduated from college and didn't know what I wanted to do, and so my father said, "Well, you need to get a job like everybody else." And so I started working in Shreveport with an insurance agency that they had there, and so kind of cut my teeth, if you will, as an insurance agent. And that was back in the day when they gave you a phone, and some of your listeners might remember what a phone book is.
Yes, I think so. A lot of our members understand, and they relate to phone books.
And there's a lot that don't, right?
That's true. Yes.
But I was given a phone and a phone book and said, "Here you go. There's your potential customer list. Get to calling." And so I did that for several years in Shreveport. Moved over to Dallas, or back to Dallas, because I graduated college from Dallas. And continued my insurance agent career, if you will, for a couple more years. And during that period, I also managed a Bermuda captive that my family had started, and worked on a lot of different programs, ERISA work comp programs. And but after being an agent for about 5 years, I was looking for something different. Had an opportunity to become a reinsurance broker. And, for your listeners that don't know, reinsurance is simply when an insurance company purchases insurance for itself, for its book of business.
Okay.
And became a broker, found myself working a lot back in London at Lloyd's, and really enjoyed my time as a reinsurance broker. Had clients all over the country, writing all different kinds of lines of business: homeowners, auto, taxi cab programs, legal liability programs, just a lot of different stuff. And enjoyed that, had a great time doing it, but again, was presented with an opportunity to move to yet another sector of the industry and started working for a commercial trucking agent. and it was called an MGA, a managing general agency. But it was the largest commercial trucking MGA in the country at the time, and I became part of the executive management team, and so we were responsible for pretty much the operations of all of the company, and I was part of the team that was. And did that, had a great time there. That company was acquired by a foreign company. They came in and, thanked the management for their participation and said, go forth and do something else. That was 2010.
I understand that very well.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of us. And so 2010, and took that opportunity to move back to Louisiana. Moved to New Orleans with my wife and two young children, and started working for a claims company, a claims TPA, third-party administrator. Mm-hmm. Was doing that, and, all of a sudden you have the BP oil spill happens. That occurred right as I was coming on board that company. And so we got engaged with Ken Feinberg and the Gulf Coast Claims Facility. And many, I'm sure many of your listeners are, familiar with that because it impacted our entire state economy. But the GCCF was stood up by Ken Feinberg with BP money. I think they deposited $20 billion to help settle claims. And through that process, we saw over 1 million claims come into the GCCF over several year period. We were responsible for helping people get the money that they were owed. So did that. That ran through its time period. And that company I was with, I left and started working for one of the largest catastrophe claims adjusting companies in the country, out of North Shore. And a catastrophe claims adjusting company, what they do is, when you have a hurricane or any type of mass catastrophe with lots of claims, mm-hmm. the insurance companies will call these companies and they'll say, hey, I need 50 people, 100 people, 800 people. And so you deploy those folks, those adjusters in the field. And, we've all got experience with them in South Louisiana, and there's good ones and there's bad ones. I like to think that we were one of the good ones. But worked there. I was part of that executive management team. Worked and did some work in New York and New Jersey with the Superstorm Sandy recovery program, not the insurance side, but the federal recovery program that the government stood up to help people there, and stayed with that company until it sold. And then I had the opportunity to decide what I wanted to do, and I left there and started working with my brother to just manage some family investments. And that brings us up to 2019. I decided to run for Commissioner of Insurance in the 2019 election. Came up a little short, but hey, I'm a commissioner-elect today. Here we are in 2023.
Well, congratulations to this achievement of you, most recent achievement. This is the first time we've had a new insurance commissioner in
17
terms.
Years.
And so we have a new governor coming in. We have several new legislators coming in. You already have a huge challenge ahead of you just in the insurance side, but now you've got lots of new faces. You're a new face in government. How do you think you're going to approach this with the coming of the new year?
Yeah, and you're right. We've got on the state level, you've got 5 of the 7 statewide offices, new faces there. And then, we've got a whole host of new House and Senate members coming in. But look, I see that as a benefit, as a challenge. We're all coming in looking to change. We're all coming in there to try and make Louisiana better. And even the folks that are the 2 that are still there, and that's, the Lieutenant Governor and the Commissioner of Agriculture, Mike Strain, know both of those folks very well, but also know all of the other candidates running, either running for the runoff for all the other offices. I've been traveling this state for the last 4 years. I know most of the legislative leadership, new and potential coming in. I know a lot of the legislators that whether they're running for re-election or first time coming in. So it's not like it's just I'm popping in and going, oh boy, what do I got to do now? So right. I'm excited because look, we've all run this election cycle, whether we acknowledge it or not, or know it or not. Insurance reform was part of the voters. It was on their mind. And you saw lots of polls. It was either number 1, 2, or 3 on everybody's mind in this state. And so I'm fortunate that as the Commissioner of Insurance coming in, I'm going to be able to work with a lot of legislators and state leadership that all want to be part of that solution. So it's not just going to be me trying to figure out what to do. Everybody wants to be a part of it because everybody realizes how important it is that we get this right.
For many folks, insurance is more of a four-letter word than anything else. It is something you need, you benefit from having it, but we've not seen a break in insurance for a long time, and that's across the board for everyone. We can zero down for a minute specifically with our loggers in the forest products industry. They have had a really difficult time over the last several years with increases, with the cost of up to $25,000 per truck per year. It's very difficult to pay those bills and still run a business where you're making money for your family, you're making money to pay your employees so that they can take care of their families. It's a huge challenge. How do you approach the commercial trucking? You had some experience in there. You had talked about that. That is hugely near and dear to our hearts. And so we're looking at the new folks coming in with really great expectations that something can be done. What's the first on your agenda?
Yeah, well, first, I'll say I acknowledge and I certainly understand the financial challenges that insurance is presenting to the fine folks and the businesses in Louisiana. And you're right. I mean, I hear the same stories about $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 for one, truck trailer. And I don't know how a business can operate that. I mean, you can't run it 24/7 and make a profit to pay that. Like you said, pay that plus your employees, plus your insurance, plus your fuel and your maintenance and all the other unknown costs that pop up. So I certainly feel and understand that people are struggling out there. And look, that's quite frankly part of why I want this challenge, to make a difference, to make an impact. One of the things I didn't mention is that, growing up in DeRidder, and a lot of your, folks in the logging and the forestry business will know this name, but, my father and his business partner started a company called AmeriSafe. They write workers' compensation, primarily in the logging industry. And they created that company back in the 80s because they saw a problem with work comp rates, specifically for logging. They created a solution and they implemented it, and it helped stabilize and made workers' comp affordable back in that industry. I'm not proposing that the state create an insurance company to do that, because I don't think that that's a solution. It might be a potential solution if things continue on the trend, but I'll tell you that, that's the philosophy I take, is we've got to sit down and identify what's driving that cost. What creates, the conditions so that an insurance company can only offer a $25,000 quote, and look, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen on what they think is driving that. Certainly we've got some out of proportion judgments that are a result of litigation, for things that would normally be considered minor, or maybe fender bender, to use a popular vernacular there. But we've got to get that back under control. And I say we, I mean, the judicial system has got to get that back under control. People should be made whole. That's what insurance is about. It's to make you whole. It's not to be a lottery. When you get injured, or, whether it's your car, your home, your kitchen fire, whatever it is, insurance is designed to put you back where you were, not to make you better than, not to give, if you're driving a Ford and your car gets, totaled, it's not that you get to drive a Ferrari next. And that's what's happening when you get these judgments, these just, out of sight judgments. So that's part of it. The other side is we've got to identify what's driving the litigation. Why is there so much litigation in our state when it comes
lots
to
of
that?
Billboards say if you get in a wreck, so-and-so lawyer can get you $250,000 or $500,000 or $2 million. It just depends on what you see. That's all over the state.
And I don't disagree with that statement, but it takes someone to make that decision too.
Explain.
Someone got in a wreck, whether they were hit or they hit someone. Mm-hmm. If you're the person bringing that litigation, if you're the one saying, I want to sue, you have to make that decision.
Right.
right? A billboard doesn't make you.
No, but it certainly
But
is incentive.
It's incentive, but I'm just saying there's two sides to that.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not. And again, I'm not disagreeing with you. There's a lot of advertisement out there that encourages people to go hire an attorney.
Right.
But you can't. That's part of the. I know it's been discussed in the legislature at length, and everybody. You can't stop a business from advertising.
Right.
Just that you wouldn't want your business not to be prohibited from advertising. But what we've got to do is start to educate, the Louisiana citizens on what's maybe just.
Right.
And that's where I say, insurance is to put you back where you were when you had the accident, not to make you better than you were. Right. And so that's what we've got to take a deeper dive into and have a transparent and, perhaps, a conversation that many people probably don't want to hear. Because they do think it's a lottery. It's popcorn lottery. I've heard all kinds of different terms on it.
Yeah.
And look, that's not what it's for.
Let's backtrack just a little bit. You talked about there's a company, AmeriSafe, that came up in the late '90s under Governor Mike Foster. They created another agency for workers' comp that seemed to help with a lot of the hurricane damage and flooding. The state came up with the Citizens Plan. Where that is sometimes the only resort for some folks to have insurance. Are we looking at possibly something like that for the trucking industry?
Look, in the company you're talking about is, LWCC was created.
LWCC, yes.
That was the one that was created under Senator Foster, proposed the legislation.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, and then that was 1988, and Governor Romer signed it into legislation, which created it. So let's go way back on the time machine.
My
there.
apologies. I got
no. But and LWCC did help to promote a stabilization of the work comp industry, and it did. And it's been very successful doing that. The other company you're talking about was Louisiana Citizens.
Yes, and
it was created right around. I guess I need to look at the stats on that, but right about the time that Hurricane Katrina. Back in 2005. So maybe it was stood up early 2005. But yes, it is for today's purposes, it is the market of last resort. If you can't obtain a homeowner's quote anywhere else or commercial property quote anywhere else, that's where you go. They have to offer you coverage. They also are by law required to be 10% over the parish average, the average premium in the parish. And so it is the most expensive of the most expensive. It's designed to be a safety net to provide you that coverage, as we said, when you can't obtain it anywhere else. Problem I have with it is if it's an unaffordable safety net, then it's not a safety net.
Yes.
If you can't afford it, then it might as well not be there. So is Commissioner of Insurance incoming? Look, I want to take a look at Louisiana citizens and see what we can do to bring that down, whether it's temporarily suspend the 10% overage to give policyholders a little bit of premium relief. And again, it's got to be temporary. We don't want Louisiana citizens to compete with the standard markets, Right. But again, if it's the only market, then we got to do so. We got to think outside the box. I know that last year they took I believe it was a 63% rate increase due to reinsurance premium. Wow. Citizens chose to pass that along to you and I as a consumer. I'm going to take a look at that and see maybe we don't need to pass that big. Maybe we still have to pass something along, but there's got to be a different way to look at that. Because again, if you can't afford the safety net, it's not a safety net.
There's an article recently in the Wall Street Journal concerning Florida's insurance, and specifically that article dealt with homeowners insurance. Homeowners has also risen just like every other insurance, not just in Louisiana, but there are some that stated if their property was paid for, they'll just forego insurance, and if it's destroyed, they'll just simply walk away and sell the land. That seems to be really opposed to the American dream of having your own little slice of property, your own home. Will Louisiana, I don't know if Louisiana's gotten to that point, but do you think Louisiana might get to that point?
Look, I think our crisis in Louisiana is as bad as Florida's. I think the major difference between Louisiana and Florida is that, we have 4 million people, they have 27 million people. Their property market is just much larger. It's still a crisis, so, and at the end of the day, if it's impacting you personally, it's your crisis, and you could care less about the other states, right?
That's true.
And I understand that. And what you just identified taking place in Florida is happening in Louisiana today. There are people that they did the right thing. They had they built a dream, home of their dreams, or maybe it wasn't even the home of their dreams, but it's the home that they built. They paid their mortgage off. They don't owe anyone any money on it. And the insurance is so expensive now that they are choosing not to buy insurance on their home, on what I would argue is, for many families, their largest asset. And it's now in jeopardy, because when that next storm does come, and there will be, unfortunately, another one, if that home is wiped out, destroyed, that family's, their biggest asset is gone. And what they choose to do, whether they choose just to leave the state, leave the parish, that's unfortunate for them. It's not, it's not a desirable outcome. And it also takes that piece of property out of commerce. So that impacts the local parish governments. I mean, it's a travesty for that individual, that family, but there's also ripples that we need to pay attention to, which is why it's all the more important that, working with the governor and with the other elected officials at the state level and with our new legislators, the House and the Senate, to all come together to identify, what needs to be done to bring the capacity back, to make the insurance market work where it does work in most states. But, Texas, they've got coastal exposure just like we do. It works, and they're not the they're not the second most expensive. Look at our neighbors, even to the north, Arkansas. It works there. Mississippi, Alabama, Florida is getting their house in order after their hurricane that they had. And look, you think about it. Louisiana, we had 4 hurricanes in a 12-month, 2-day period, 800,000 claims. Florida had 1 hurricane, Ian, and they had 3 special sessions to address their crisis over there. We had those 4 hurricanes, and we had 1 special session, and all that did was to allocate $45 or $62 million, depending on what the final number comes out to be, toward an incentive program to give for-profit insurance companies money to keep writing business. That didn't address the problem. It didn't address the root cause. And I argued that it didn't even the Band-Aid that, it now appears that it was intended to be, it wasn't even a Band-Aid. I mean, those companies didn't come in and write tens and tens of thousands or 40,000 policies, we were told. So we've got another opportunity. We're going to have, like you said, the new leadership coming in, new elected officials. We're going to have a regular session that kicks off in March. I can't propose it. I'm asking for the governor and or the state and the House and Senate leadership to hold a special session to address the property crisis. And I don't do that. I don't ask that lightly. I know it's expensive. I know it takes up a lot of people's time, but the intent there and the focus is going to be to identify a handful of bills that will be designed to increase competition, to make Louisiana into a more desirable state for companies to come and write business in. And if we can achieve that, then I'll ask, if we can identify and agree on what those items are, I'll ask for it. I won't say we'll do it. I'll ask for it with the intent of bringing that competition back.
The incoming governor has said he would want to have a special session that deals with crime in Louisiana. Is what you're proposing a possible piggyback to that particular special session?
I certainly think so. It doesn't need to be a special session just for one item, in my opinion. Now, look, I'm not a legislator, so I don't know that, and I know it's difficult. Anytime you have a special session, all eyes are focused on whatever the call is. But again, my intent is to be very transparent, to feel very assured that whatever like I said, the handful of bills that we would come up with the design to bring the capacity back, will do it. And if they don't, I'm not going to ask for it. And I've had a conversation, with Governor-elect Landry, about my design and my intent. I'm not going to ask anybody to, again, spend all that time and money if I don't truly feel and have had conversations that confirm that, the bills will do as intended.
2 other subjects I really
Sure.
want to try and cover. One, you had mentioned the surrounding states, and there are examples of companies that will establish their business in a neighboring state, but most of their work is done in Louisiana. But they go to another state because, one, the insurance premiums are cheaper, and two, in some cases, the sales taxes are cheaper as well. I mean, that's a business decision that they certainly have the freedom to do, but does that take away from Louisiana when they're operating from out of state?
Oh, it certainly does. I mean, we lose that tax base, and look, if you've got a business that moves across, and this is happening, I think, every day too, especially on the fringe of the state, the perimeter. If you're got a business in Lake Charles, it's easy for you. I say easy. I mean, it's a tough decision for a business owner to make, but it's, you move across the state line and perhaps you relocate to Beaumont. You can still keep your same customer base in Lake Charles. You can still run your same routes, but Lake Charles and Calcasieu Parish and Cameron, and they lose that tax base. They lose those employees. I mean, so that impacts the state as well. Same thing can happen in Shreveport, Bossier. Same thing happens along, with New Orleans and Slidell. It's easy to move over to Mississippi and keep doing it because it's cheaper to do business. And look, we talk about, or you hear it spoken a lot of tax reform, about how Louisiana is an outlier when it comes to our tax base and, how we tax and what we tax. And they're always talking about reform, and we need to, change some of that so that we look more like our neighboring states. That's what I'm proposing when it comes to insurance. I'm not asking for anything crazy, anything special. I just want us to look more like our neighboring states so that the companies that are here can stay here and aren't incentivized to move out of state, but also companies on the other side, the companies that may be in Texas, can say, hey, I wouldn't mind opening a business in Lake Charles, or I wouldn't mind opening a shop in Slidell or Shreveport or Bossier or Alexandria or wherever you are. So, it's insurance cost definitely plays a very pivotal role in economic development, and it hasn't really been tied together in years past, or if it has, I've not heard it, and I've certainly been listening. But I think that's part of the conversation too. That, I mean, I don't know any legislator or, statewide elected leader that doesn't want to support economic development. They all do. We just need to make sure we're having the right conversation about it.
The history of Louisiana is curious. The majority of voters in the state are Democrat. The supermajority in the legislature is Republican. I think there probably tends to be a little more conservative bent to most folks. But when you look at a populist view and you speak of, we're going to make this situation more of a free market situation, some folks kind of get freaked out by that. And why do you suppose that is? And what can government do? What can state government do specifically to ease the mindset that an open market is certainly something that could be very beneficial to us?
Well, I would ask, anyone that has that concern, just open your eyes and look around. Everything else that you do and you buy is free market. I'm the regulator. That's the position that I sought. My job is to regulate, but it's three primary focuses. It's to make sure that insurance is available, that insurance is affordable, and that insurance is accountable. And that failed over the last several years. It's certainly not available. It's certainly not affordable. And on the homeowner side, we had 12 companies go insolvent, so they weren't accountable. So, there is a balance. Your listeners, I just ask them to believe that there's a balance. And that's my job as a regulator, is to make sure and promote a healthy industry, but hold the industry accountable. When you've got bad players out there, that's my job to go after them and make sure that that they do what they're supposed to do. But before that, my job is also prior to that, is to try and make sure that those folks don't come in and operate in the state of Louisiana. You had a bunch of companies that were invited to come in and offer cheap insurance, and they did. And I guess you could say you benefited from that cheap insurance, but you only benefited from it when there wasn't a hurricane, because when we had the 4 hurricanes, those companies went insolvent. They didn't have the financial resources. So that's my job, is to make sure that they're accountable. They have the money to pay the claims from the premiums that they took from you as a consumer. It's not binary. It doesn't mean if it's good for the company, it's bad for the consumer. And it also doesn't mean if it's good for the consumer, it's bad for the company. There is an equilibrium there. And like I said, it works in most other states. That's my job. That's the job I ask for, is the ability to go in to help, attract companies to Louisiana, good companies, but also to promote the healthy companies that are still here. And again, whether we're talking about auto or homeowners or commercial, it's all a crisis right now. And I get it. People are suffering, and I don't ever lose sight of that. It's never something that's far from my mind. From when I wake up in the morning till I go to sleep at night, this is the job that can help impact those people in a positive way. And I'm very, blessed to have the opportunity to work in it.
A lot of eyes will be on you in the coming months, especially getting started.
Coming months? What do you mean? It hasn't started?
I think especially once everybody's sworn in, I think they kind of giving you a grace period right now because, but in all seriousness, a lot of folks will be looking at you, with great expectations and a lot of hope that change will come and that the change will be beneficial. What message would you like to give them?
I would. The message is that I understand the financial stress people are going through. I hear it. I see it. I get told stories every day as I travel the state, and I want them to know that I get that. And the job that, again, as I said earlier, I sought this job out because I think it allows me to bring the skill set that I've developed over the last 20 plus years to an office that will allow me to have the biggest impact on people's lives in Louisiana in a very positive way, provided we're able to, I work with the legislature and we're able to get, the changes that we identify and that we agree need to be made to attract and create a healthy insurance marketplace. We've had it in the past. We can certainly get back there again.
Tim Temple, the insurance commissioner-elect for Louisiana, thanks so much for taking time for us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Look forward to doing this again.
Thank you for listening to Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. This episode of Minding the Forest was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry and the LFA and its programs and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers in the state, go to laforestry.com. You can also send comments or suggestions to me by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue at laforestry.com, or check out the show notes for our contact information. Remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.